Good morning, everybody. How are you? Happy Thursday. We made it to Thursday. It's a beautiful, beautiful day out where I live, and I hope the same for you. I hope you're doing well. I hope your families are doing well. Thank you so much for joining me today for a special edition of our usual live stream. You know that usually we have data science discussion and I take your questions and we talk about a variety of things. But as you also may know, on Thursdays, I've been bringing you special guests. Every day in August, we've had special guests, and today is no different. Today, we are joined by my good friend Lynn. She is an HR analytics specialist. She is a wealth of knowledge on a variety of topics in a variety of industries. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from her and hearing her experience and all of the different things that she's done throughout her career. And she's also here to take your questions. So I got to tell you guys, I am so impressed by the people that I've reached out to because I want to make them comfortable. I give them the option of doing video or live stream and they have all said, "No, I want to meet the people. I want to come out there. I want to take their questions live." So Lynn has graciously volunteered to be here among you and be willing to listen to your thoughts, your concerns, and if there's some way that she can help you or give you some advice, she's going to be here for that. So really appreciate you guys being here. So I'm seeing the chat fill up, which is great. I'm seeing people on both Instagram and on YouTube. If you are on Instagram, it might be easier to switch over to YouTube where we have a little bit more of a widescreen view, but it's up to you, whatever platform you're comfortable with. I have put the YouTube link on the Instagram chat for you to click on, and then you can view us on YouTube. So guys, go ahead and fill up the chat with your questions. Or maybe you want to wait to hear a little bit more about Lynn so you can kind of think about the questions you want to ask. But really looking forward to this and really happy that we can have these types of special interviews or special streams for you. So Lynn, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
Lynn,
you.
now Lynn, I know your background because we worked at Citi together, but would you like to share your background and maybe a little bit of your career history or
Sure,
your favorite topics that you want to talk about today?
sure. I will. So first and foremost, Dennis, thank you so much for asking me because um, this is my heart. I've spent my career in what I call financial services or financial service adjacent. And as Dennis mentioned, part of that time was at Citi. I was the global head of HR reporting and analytics. Actually, it was called Human Capital Reporting and Analytics, HCRA. And in that role, now I have to tell you a backstory. So, in case any of you are wondering about how to break into data science, when Citi asked me to take on that global role, um, I had never run an analytics team, never. And so, candidly, I did it because one of the things I think that's helped me be successful is I'm okay to tell people I don't know something, and I'm very happy to ask a bunch of questions to educate myself. And so that's how I approached that role. I said, well, people are people, and if they're good people, they'll help get me onboarded, and we'll go from there.
Hmm.
But in the course of my career, I mean, I started in banking as a what was back in the day called a mortgage escrow analysis analyst. So basically, it was calculating the interest, what was going to be the escrow payments due on construction loans. And I was during a break from college. And when I went back to college, I wanted to keep working at the bank. And the only thing that was available to do in the evening back then was collections. And so I became a bill collector. So I was calling past due customers on their credit cards. You know,
Smiling and dialing.
huh?
Smiling and dialing.
I don't know about the smiling part, but definitely dialing. Uh, and and it's funny because when I talk to people about being in financial services, I think if you've never worked in that vertical, the vast majority of people just think about the branch,
Yeah.
the teller, or, they may think about the guys that do all the trading on Wall Street. And I think what a lot of people miss and don't realize is that the reason I've spent an entire career in the vertical is because I have been so extraordinarily grateful and fortunate to have done so many different things under the umbrella of financial services. So I was
Mhm.
a phone collector, then eventually ran collections. So I ran call centers. I had four big call centers. Um, but then I got into projects because I wanted to understand that piece of work. So I started doing business requirements, technical requirements for a big card project. Um, and then I did card product development, and then I did client management. Then I went to go work for a software company, standing up a consulting practice to augment their software offerings.
Wow.
Um, and when Dennis and I worked together, it was because at the time the CIO at Citi is a gentleman I had worked with at Bank of America. And he said to me, he goes, I need you to come over and help me with some things. Would you please come? I was like, okay. I love this guy. He's a great guy. I still am in touch with him. He's in Australia now. Um, and at the time, he brought me in because there was this burning question at Citi that a bunch of business units had bought their own software and bypassed tech. There was a concern how much there was. And Scott basically sent me on a investigation tour across the business units to figure out what tech was out there. And I came back and I said, "Oh yeah, they bought a lot of tech." And then he had issued, the bank issued. Dennis, you may remember this. They issued this business managed tech
Sure.
mandate that all business managed tech had to be folded into tech.
Right.
And then I went from there. Um, so I've done a bunch. I've
Sure.
done a bunch. And if I have any advice for any of you that are out there either trying to pursue a career in data scientists, I tell you, you're in the right place at the right time,
Mhm.
because there is no role that I ever took that there wasn't a data component to it. Because
Sure.
because one of the things I've acquired over the years is my Six Sigma certification.
Mhm.
And in Six Sigma, it's all about measurement. And guess what? You need data to measure.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. Love that. You hit on 2 things that kinda caught my ear, um, you mentioned about being able to move into a leadership role even though maybe you weren't technical yourself, and I have found that to be a trait of really good managers, where, it's at the end of the day, it's still people. It's still the planning, it's still the communication, the one-on-ones and things like that, so I really love that. And the second thing I think you hit on, that I think would be also important for our guests today is that some of my guests are still looking for their first jobs or early in their careers. So you mentioned some of the policy side of all these tech projects that you don't necessarily think about, or maybe you didn't even know about when you're in school or starting out, where there's all this like policy overhead it's more than just writing code and being technical. There's all this policy overhead that you have to deal with. So thank you so much for touching on both of those.
and if I could expand on that ever so much. So what you just said reminded me of my interviews at Citi. So mind you, I am not a technologist by anybody's stretch of the imagination. You don't want me anywhere near coding. You don't want me anywhere near any of that. And yet the CIO for Citi was sending my resume around. And I will never forget this as long as I live. I was interviewing with the gentleman who would be my first boss at Citi. And he's telling me about all these issues with the coders and the developers and da 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 da. And I finally stopped him and I said, listen, I'm not sure what Scott's told you about me, but I am not a technologist by any stretch of the imagination. I've never done development. You don't want me anywhere near development. And at the risk of offending anybody, because I'm going to quote him directly, um, what he said to me and stayed with me forever. He said, Lynn, you're right. We have a lot of really, really smart coders and developers here. But what we don't have is leaders who understand how the business
Yeah, yeah,
actually uses the technology
for
and can
sure.
call bullshit when they want something they don't need and we could solve a different way.
Sure.
And I remember just laughing and going, "Oh well, hell, I can do that all day." So
Right,
that's why
right.
I got the job at City. So
Yeah,
I guess what I would say to people, and I do a lot of mentoring as a volunteer, and what I would say is that the more you get out of kind of that frontline individual contributor role, what I would tell all of your guests is that the further as you move along in your careers, the skills you obtain in every role become more and more transferable cross verticals, cross divisions in organizations.
for sure.
You know, so I think be mindful of that, because I think what people tend to think is that, oh, I started here, so this is now my path. And it might be. But what I would say to all of your guests, and again, this becomes a personal choice, I think be very mindful as you, especially as you're on the early days of your career, is really pay attention to the things that get you jazzed, that get you fired up, and figure out how you branch out to
Hmm.
experience and play with that more, because
Yeah.
that's what really is going to give you the greatest options as you move along in your career. I mean, you heard my story. I started in operations, went to projects,
Hmm.
went to card development, went, and it was a matter of just taking the steps that, and sometimes they're lateral steps, because you can't go from operations into project and then be a PMO. So,
Right.
I went from running 150 people to being back at an individual contributor writing requirements. Um, but give yourself permission to do that, because I think it's important to, you think you know what you want to do until you land accidentally or on purpose on something you discover A, you're really good at,
Right.
and B, you really love doing.
Right.
And so
Right.
just keep that open mindset as you take on roles.
I like that. So that sounds like great advice. So let's stay in that vein of thinking. I know that you've managed a lot of people throughout your career. So
Largest shop was 800. I had 800 people across 4 call centers.
wow, that's a lot. That's a lot. So if you think about your first year or your second year analyst, somebody very, very early on in their career, what are some of the better traits that you think that you associated with them? Or what are some of the traits that some of the people listening could help develop, if they're really looking to, make an impact their first or second year? What do you think, Lynn?
Every leader is going to be different. So I'll give you and I'm going to apologize right now. I'm doing this from home. I have 2 dogs, and every now and again they will come up and want some attention. Um, when I look to hire anybody, a couple of my rules. I never look for what I call a mini me, because to me the best leaders are going to look at what they need on the team, which is
Yep.
not more of them. I don't ever want yes men on my
Yeah,
team.
absolutely.
Never. So my first bit of advice is, you got to be courageous. Now, again, I'm not saying, show up hot and, burn a bunch of bridges, but what I look for in people is curiosity
Hmm.
and a courage to challenge the status quo.
Absolutely.
Now, so when I think about my analysts, because this is a God's honest true story. Like I said, I didn't never run an analyst team. So my first couple of months was visiting my sites to even get to know my people. But as part of that, I just had very informal roundtables. So how do you like working here?
Hmm.
What's your favorite part of the job? Um, you kind of listen. Being a leader means building trust. And I'm sorry, I will say this till my last breath in the professional world. Technology changes. There's always advancements in how you're going to work. For every company across every vertical, the true differentiator is its people.
Hmm.
That's the only thing that any company can ever claim, because only one company is going to have you working at it. So you are either a differentiator or you're not at your company, because there's only one of you.
Hmm.
And so the people are always the differentiator. So I always try to create an environment. So I think if you talk to anybody who's ever worked for me, they'll say, yeah, it's just pretty requiring. I'm very hard charging. I want results. But what they will also always tell you is, I'm very supportive and I am there to help them be successful. What I want in return is, don't just accept things because that's the way it's always been done. Be courageous and offer ideas. And I think particularly in the data space, this is huge. You
Hmm.
look at any company, they will tell you what their initiatives are. When I read these articles, one of the first things I always think about is, what data are they collecting to assess what they ought to be doing to fix XYZ?
Hmm.
And I would challenge anybody in that space to do the same. If you work for a company, you hear what it is they're focused on. There's data that helps inform those things. And I think it behooves people in the data space to surface up those ideas. So
Hmm.
I'm always looking for intellectual curiosity.
Yeah.
I'm always looking for people with, the other thing I will say is emotional maturity,
Hmm.
because just because you may have a great idea, I may not have bandwidth to do it. So I don't want you to get offended or think I'm not listening. You have to set very tight priorities if you're going to get some things done. But I think it's always about being curious about why things happen the way they do, and being able to offer new ideas.
Hmm.
I love that. The people that just get me so excited is the ones that say, "Hey, do you ever think we could do this? What about this? Why aren't we
Hmm.
measuring that? Why aren't we?" No, that's a great idea. Let's see. What do we have the data to do it? Is the data clean? Is it reliable? Blah blah blah. But yeah, let's go test it.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Uh, Curiosity is definitely important across the board, but it's extra important in data science where you have to ask questions. You have to ask a lot of questions.
well, and here's the other piece I would say. I mean, that you cannot go a day without reading some article about artificial intelligence.
Hmm.
And the people who are not close enough to that, I actually had the fortune, at City, to play around with some AI and machine learning.
Hmm.
Um, it's a really great spot for folks in the data space to really add value,
Sure.
because artificial intelligence, is only as good as the inputs.
Hmm.
And so the inputs are data. And so, is the data pure? Is the data reliable? And is the data, because here's the trick with it. And I have an actual true story in when I ran HR analytics about the use of AI, and be careful, because even well intentioned data can skew things in a way that you may not have expected. At
Hmm.
one time, when I was at City, we wanted, everybody recruiting is always getting slammed with resumes, and how do I mean, and this is no lie. I mean, anybody in the job market, uh, you might have a posting and a recruiter might get 1,200 applications for
Sure.
one job. And I am not exaggerating. I was on a call yesterday and the recruiter was telling me this. And it's like, how do you pour through it? Well, so like most companies, they use artificial intelligence to start to sort through, to hopefully cull the best of the resumes based on the role. And so we had played with that at City. And at one point, we said, well, we were going to come up with a bunch of keywords. And without thinking about this thing called unconscious bias or what it would do to the outcome,
Yeah.
one of the keywords was captain. Fairly innocuous word. You wouldn't think anything. Turns out it skewed all the resumes male,
Hmm.
because when you go back and look at the why of that, boys are captains of the football team.
Hmm.
Boys, you know, are captains of this, that, or the other. There are very few things that, a young lady might do where she's going to describe it as being the
Right.
captain of.
Right.
So there was a perfect real life example of, nobody was being malicious. There was no, malevolence there. It was trying to identify good keywords, but it's also the example of how you really have to challenge and talk through using certain data and how is it going to skew your results?
I love that story. That's a great example, great illustration. Thank you for that, Lynn.
It's a real life.
Yeah,
It was,
sure,
you know.
sure. So if you're joining us on Instagram or on YouTube, thanks so much for being here. We have Lynn as our special guest today. She is a wealth of information across multiple industries. I don't want to say just HR analytics anymore because she obviously has a lot of experience. So go ahead and keep on putting your questions in the chat. Lynn and I are going to go for a few more minutes and then we'll come back to your questions. So go ahead and start filling up that chat with your questions. But Lynn, let's take just a little bit of a step back here because I love where this conversation is going. So a lot of my followers may not even know that these specialized analytics fields exist, like real estate analytics or HR analytics or internal audit analytics. So help us out here. Give us your elevator pitch on HR analytics. What is that? What is like that quick elevator pitch on? Hey Lynn, what's HR analytics?
So HR analytics, and I can only quite frankly speak to in financial services, but I suspect it's not dissimilar in other verticals. When you run HR analytics for a firm, it's the things you probably think about. You're measuring, you're basically reporting out, number of new hires, number of voluntary attrition, number of involuntary attrition, fancy language for got fired. Um, it's those kind of just the running of the business, because every head count has a dollar association. So you always, and so you want to know, what's the attrition rate for a business, because attrition, new hire acquisition is expensive. So you track everything from that basic butts and seats in a shop, how many people leave, your cost for acquisition, because there is a cost to acquire new employees.
Sure.
Um, and that's sort of the surface stuff that you can just kind of push as a canned report, because it helps a business unit understand their salary costs. What most people don't realize is that the highest number on any leader's P&L is their human cost.
Right.
It's not tech,
People, sure.
it's not buildings, it's the salary line.
Hmm.
So that's what we do in HR. Now, that's kind of table stakes. What I strove to do in the 3 years I ran HR analytics for Citi was, what else could we do? So
Hmm.
now you take it down. Bigger organizations will always have, and of course, it's made the news again in recent weeks, they will have DEI initiatives.
Hmm.
So then you start looking, and I remember this was one that was pretty important to Citi. What are your diversity metrics? Now, diversity is interesting because it's a self-disclose, not mandatory at the time of application and onboarding. So part of the challenge is it's a self-disclosure. Anybody who's ever filled out an application knows
Hmm.
when it starts asking you gender, ethnicity, race, you always have a "I wish not to disclose" button on those apps. So all of that information comes in. But if you are responsible for diversity, and I would say the only reason to be responsible for diversity, this is Lynn's opinion, not sanctioned by any company, is I personally believe um, businesses ought to reflect the communities they serve.
Hmm.
So I think diversity is important, and I think it's also important because to me, diversity is about more than just kind of the check the box things. It's also diversity of thought. That being said, so in
Hmm.
HR analytics, it goes back to what I said earlier. What are the goals of the firm around how you manage this most expensive asset at an organization, the human capital? How do you measure that? And what are you trying to accomplish with it?
Hmm.
So then you start looking at everything from what is your makeup of men and women, different minority groups, veterans, disabled populations. Um, it's also, where are you getting your performers from? What colleges are they graduating from? Um, and there's all kinds of ways that you can use the data. But it really, at the end of the day, what HR analytics ought to be about is what are the goals of a business unit with respect to managing this extraordinarily um, important piece of the puzzle? Because I'll go say it again, the people are the differentiator.
Hmm.
So if you understand that, and and then how you deal with them and how you help them be successful. So HR analytics really at its best is understanding what are the primary goals of a business unit with optimizing its people, performance, opportunities, career growth, all those things. And how do you let the data inform that, help them make those decisions?
Wonderful, wonderful. I like your message there, because that's something that I also include in my content, where um, even though you're doing data and you're a coder, or you're working in analytics, it all ties back to business impact, right? That's how we are all measured. It's
It's
not how
business
well you
outcomes.
coded, or how fast. It's do you have some sort of measurable impact that you can show about the business, right? Everything ties back somehow to a dollar value, right? No matter what you're doing. So I love that you're mentioning that, because I think that's an important message that, again, maybe somebody earlier in their career wouldn't necessarily understand.
If I can digress and share another real life story from when I took over the shop at City.
Yeah, please.
I came in, and like I said, I probably had, there was maybe 250, 300 people across 4 or 5 sites. Very, very smart people. These were some of the smartest people I ever worked with. Some of these guys were PhD data scientists. I mean, these were no joke individuals.
Sure.
But again, I come in, never ran something, but I got a process background. I'm a bit of a I've got a 3-year-old mentality where why is always my favorite question to ask. So one of the things, I started to just understand the new business I was running. How many reports do we push out every month? Canned reports. Just we generate them, push them out to the businesses. And I remember when I started, it was like over 5,000 of them. So when I went around my sites, I asked them, I says, does anybody know if anybody's reading these reports? We've been pushing them out for, I don't know, several years. Does anybody know
Right.
if anybody's reading these reports?
Right. Right.
Answer was no. I said, oh. I said, well, how about we do this? Now, I will confess, I have managed my entire career as ask for forgiveness, not permission. So that's a personal choice. Everybody
I
has
know
to
where
make.
this is going.
So at that point, I said, well, you know what? We're gonna conduct a somewhat unscientific test here, but we're gonna conduct this test.
Right.
I said, every report had a list of how many recipients. Some of these reports were going to 600 managers, 1,000 managers. I mean, city's huge, 250,000 employees, and we did all of the HR reporting for everybody,
Sure.
including the CEO's office and the board. So we went and looked at the reports, and I said to my team, I said, here's what we're going to do next month. These 10 reports, don't send them out. Don't send them.
Right. Right.
Let's just see who comes back
Yeah. Who comes? Yeah. Sure.
on the 6th or 7th of the month to ask where the hell their report is. Well, as you might imagine, nobody.
Right.
So there was my first data point. Maybe these reports are not adding the value we think they're adding.
Right. Right.
That we're spending hours producing every month. So then my second unscientific test. Now we're going to do this a different way. Let's send out these reports, only encrypt them with a password.
Right.
And let's see how many people come back and ask for the password. Because
Right.
we're gonna not include the password in the you know, so we did that. Same thing. So some of these reports that had thousands of recipients, maybe 2 people came back and said, hey, didn't get the password.
Right.
On the basis of those 2 unscientific tests, we've revamped the entire canned report suite, and we eventually got it down from over 5,000 reports down to under 2,500 reports.
Nice.
Half. Now, what was cool about that for my guys, I didn't cut nobody for doing that. I mean, that was a huge productivity shift. The way I sold that to the bank was we're going to stop producing these reports that clearly nobody's using anyway. But now I'm going to have my service delivery guys meet with you, and we're going to ask what kinds of customer reports you would want to get that would help you run your business better. And now, because you freed up my people, these very smart people, I can do something that's more valuable for your shop.
Yeah.
So that's how we did that.
I love that. You know, yeah, you're hitting on a lot of topics there, and the one that I think just reminds me the most is sometimes when you're such a strict technology guy, right? Somebody comes along and says, "Well, why are you doing that?" And they say, "That's just the way we've always done it." I mean, like,
Yep.
like no, just nobody's bothered to ask, right? Nobody's bothered to say, "Well, why?" So I love that story.
And that's the thing that if I could, that I would beg and ask all of you as you're in those roles, here's what I would say to you. It's not about where you are in the hierarchy. Always behave like it's your organization.
Mhm.
I always joke about if it was the Bank of Lynn, I would always say that if this was the Bank of Lynn, is this how I want to spend these extraordinarily bright resources? And so when the answer for that is no, then I try to figure out, well, what can I have them doing instead? And that is not something that only somebody in a specific place in the hierarchy can ask. If
Mhm.
you're doing something in a role, you gotta find a way and a time to pick your head up to understand I'm doing
Right.
this. Why am I doing this? Is it really having the intended impact on the business? And at least ask the question.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Very important. Love that, Lynn. So guys, feel free to keep on filling up the chat with questions. I'm already seeing a couple there. So Lynn, I want to start going on these questions. Um, but
Perfect.
be, but before we do that, help us out here. How can people find you? You know, how can we support you? How can people stay in touch with you?
So y'all are gonna laugh. The easiest way to find me professionally is on LinkedIn. Just look up Lynn Labrador. Yes, Labrador is is not a suit. That is my actual last name. It
It's
is
not a
a
stage name.
no, it is not. It's a less common Latino last name. It's in Spanish Labrador, but in English Labrador, like the dog. And yes, for those that are curious, one of my dogs is a lab. But you can find me on LinkedIn, Lynn Lynne Labrador.
Okay, great guys. So if you want to stay in touch with Lynn or you want to support her, Lynn Labrador is you can find her on LinkedIn. That's the primary contact way. All right, Lynn. So let's start looking at some of these questions, and feel free to if you're listening to us, feel free to add your question either on Instagram or on YouTube. But Rohan is asking, how does HR analytics help with overall HR policy? How does it add value to process compared to a pre-analytics era?
I think that. Thank you, Rohan. That's a great question. I again, because of my Six Sigma background, I often wonder. You can't. I guess the easiest way to answer it is people don't. There's an old saying in business: people don't do what you expect; they do what you inspect. And I feel as though analytics is the inspection. So many organizations will tout, oh, we're trying to hire veterans. Oh, we are committed to the LGBTQ community. Oh, we're committed to this, that, and the other. But without the analytics, it's lovely press release. What analytics does, what HR analytics does, is it actually informs where you're getting it right, where you're getting it wrong. Now, analytics is
Mm.
only part of the question, because the other thing I get on my high horse about is you should be asking anytime somebody's asking you to do a dashboard, because dashboards end up being kind of the fallback of give me this dashboard that shows me this, whether it's in Tableau or some other program. The question you should be asking is, if you've been asked to do that work, is this dashboard going to drive a decision? Because if it's not, then something's missing. And I think about that a lot when I would look at some of the diversity metrics, because every organization has different pay bands, and how you measure your diversity at certain leadership levels is you look at those bands. At Citi, C14, 15, 16 is where you start to get into the more senior leadership bands.
Sure.
And so then you start looking, well, on a self-disclosure, how many of them meet the diversity metrics? Well, you can report that number, but when you see the number so skewed, and you always do, sadly, what the analytics won't on a canned dashboard report is to tell you how and why. So what I always tell people is a dashboard may be the starting point, but as a leader, you still got to dig under that, because what you're not going to have visibility to, at least not yet, is what programs are in play that would move those things. So your question around how does the numbers drive process? Well, I'll give you a real life story. So if at one time when I was at Bank of America, I was the co-chair for our diversity council. And at the same time, like every other organization, we looked at our numbers and we said, Jesus Christ, at the front line, in some markets, we were over diverse. I mean, we had 65% diversity, but you saw a marked flip when you got to what was called the B4 level, which was department head. So, B4, B3, B2, B1, those are your exec levels. And there was a literal flip where now all of a sudden it was 20% minority, 80% non. And we said, okay, that's great. What's going on? So then we went back and got some more data to look at the performance reviews, the performance evaluations of those people. Didn't seem to be any stark difference there. So then we dug deeper, and then this gets to Rohan's question. How did we change process? We instituted a formal high potential program for minorities that mandated any high performer in a marginalized group had to be assigned XYZ mentor for the next 2 years. So the reporting and the analytics of that reporting drove policy and drove the process, because the numbers are great, but you don't do anything with them. We've all been victim at some company, and for those of you that haven't started, you will be, of the annual VOE survey. I watched this happen at Citi. You do this annual Voice of Employee survey. One of the lowest scoring questions was, do you think anything's going to change as a result of the survey? And the answer got worse and worse year in and year out, because you get all this data, you don't do anything with it. And then what we watched happen was participation in the survey started to drop. So it starts with, no, we don't think anything's going to change. Then they just stop doing the damn thing. So analytics is very powerful, but there have to be people who take the numbers and start to get at root cause of what may be dry, and testing some different things. So Rohan, I hope that answers that question a little bit, but it's a very powerful place to point people in the right direction of the things they can do.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. So our next question is from Patrick. I just graduated with my PhD in physics, where I did a lot of data science work. I don't have any job experience. I've had good interviews, but other candidates are chosen. Any advice to stand out?
What I will say to listen, I feel your pain. So at the risk of TMI, I myself have been looking for my next gig for the last 2 months. So I'm living what you're going through. And I think it's, I'm not going to give you doom and gloom. What I'm going to tell you is you only need one job. And on any given day, there's thousands out there. You just got to make that connection. Here's a couple bits of advice that I'm using that's helping open doors. I think it's important, even in school, while you say you have no job experience, I'm betting in the course of getting a PhD, God bless you, you're way smarter than I am. I only have a bachelor's. You probably participated in different projects or things where you had to solve things. And I think on your resume, you need to call those out, because I think one of the concerns for a lot of recruiters is, and I will say this as somebody who's hired hundreds and hundreds of people, I think, what the schools don't always do such a great job of is helping graduates understand how to translate the work they did academically into how you will apply that in a real workspace.
Hmm. Sure.
And so that would be my advice. Think through some of the challenges, some of the projects you did through the course of your learning, because those will have applicability to how you could add value in an organization. And Patrick, again, I'm on LinkedIn. If you want to have a one-off, I'm happy to have that with you. Because I feel your pain. It's a tough market, but then again, just keep the faith. I know that sounds easy. You just got to make some connections. The other bit of advice I would give you, um, I don't know how active you are on LinkedIn, but for whatever the role is you're applying to, do a search. This is something you can do on LinkedIn that I don't know everybody knows about. But in LinkedIn, most people go in and do a search for a person or a company. You can also type in the role you're looking for. So say you're looking for a role as a, data analyst or whatever the title is. Put that in the search bar and click the people. There's a button, there's a bunch of buttons that'll say jobs, company, blah, blah, blah. Click the people. What that will give you, and it'll be in the millions, oh, by the way, of people who in their profile summary list that job role as part of who they are.
Hmm.
You can further sort that for where you live. So, like when I do it, because I still do it, I do operational excellence or I do transformation executive. I will click US or I will click Boston area because I live in Massachusetts. No, this is not a Massachusetts accent. I'm a New Yorker, but I moved here because of my daughter. Um, and yes, I'm still a Yankees fan and a Giants fan. Uh, but so, Patrick, you can go in LinkedIn and do a search on the actual job title you're looking for, do a search, click on people, and then find some people at, ideally you probably have in your mind um, some target companies that you may be looking for. So now you'll have a list of people and it'll say current title, blah, 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 at company X. Drop them a note. I'm a recent graduate, looking for my first role. I see you're in this field. Would love to get your advice on how to connect, on how to, open those doors. Would you be willing to connect? Send it
Hmm.
as a connection request. And if they accept, set up time with them, a half-hour conversation to just talk to them. What do you like about your job? What do you like about this company? What advice would you give me? Here's the magic in that. You're not calling them to ask them for a job. But 9 times out of 10, if you make the right impression on them, they'll offer to help you.
Hmm.
And that's when you can say, well, I'd love to give you my resume if you know anybody, blah, blah, blah. You'd be shocked how often that happens. I had a conversation with the chief risk officer at Eastern Bank on Friday for doing exactly what I'm just telling you to do. People
That's
want to
great.
help.
That's great.
They don't know you need the help. So so that would be my advice.
I
Hopefully
like
that.
that advice, Lynn, and I certainly have been the recipient of some of those similar emails. Um,
Have you ever said
but
no when somebody did that?
well, here's where I'm going with that. It depends. You got to craft it right, right?
Hmm.
Because there is
Yeah,
an art,
it can't be the I'm looking for a job, come help me. They don't know you
right?
from Adam.
Right, and so
And
and I've gotten those, right? Yeah.
I personally will not put my integrity on the line for somebody I don't know.
Well,
So,
that's exactly what I tell people when I get some of those messages. It's like, hey, I don't know what your goal is here, but this is a very low probability message of hearing back, right? The hiring managers I know are never calling you back on this. So I would encourage the people listening to us. Lynn's giving us really great advice here, and as she says, she still uses it now. But please make sure that you're crafting those messages and in the meetings and the follow-ups with a level of manners and etiquette that is appropriate for the situation. Because otherwise, you're not going to have the same success.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, you never want to go into a stranger and say, "Hey, help me get a job."
Hmm.
But having said that, I will also tell you I have templates for all of these things because I don't want to have to think about it. And Dennis is spot on. There's a way to craft it that is not asking for a job, does not breathe
Sure.
desperation, doesn't it really, and I'll be honest with you guys, it isn't about getting a job. Because I'm gonna tell you what, guys, whether you have a job or don't have a job, the thing what you need to think about in your careers, and if nobody's ever told you that, remember who told it to you first. There is no such thing as job security. But here's what is absolutely possible: career security. Jobs are fleeting, anything can happen on any given day. It's happened to me 5 times in the last 20 years. Do I look unhappy? I am not. I don't ever expect job security, and not for nothing, that's very freeing. What I have is career security.
Sure.
How did I get career security? It's called creating meaningful relationships. This right here is what I do every day. When a former colleague who I've had a great relationship with asks me to do something, I do it. I don't get paid. Dennis doesn't get paid. But we do it because we have a meaningful relationship. Now, guess what? Tomorrow, if Dennis, who knows my background, were to come across a job that he thought I'd be perfect at, who do you think's going to be the first person he reaches out to? The bumbalan who just sent him a, "Hey, I need a job, help me," or the person who gave without any expectations in an authentic way to build a relationship and have a relationship? That's who they're going to. So, no such thing as job security, but you absolutely own career security. The day I lost my job in June, that day alone, you would have thought I was a rock star. My phone blew up without me even posting anything on LinkedIn. I had 10, 20 people reach out to me the afternoon I lost my job. "Hey, I just heard you're no longer with. How can I help? What can I do?" That's the power of relationships, guys. Never minimize that. But they got to be authentic.
Yeah.
You got to be willing to give. It can't just be you reach out to somebody you haven't talked to in 5 years and all of a sudden you're going to ask them and say, "Hey, help me find a job." That's you got to cultivate those relationships, but they will create career security for you.
Wonderful. I love that message, Lynn. Yeah, there's a whole art to crafting those, but it gets easier with practice.
Especially when you
Um,
create a template.
right.
I legit have a template that stays within the 300 character limits of LinkedIn.
Oh, that's right. There is a limit. Okay. Very
It's
nice.
300. I have it crafted down to where it stays within 280. I'm
Wonderful.
deadly serious. So if anybody, like I said, LinkedIn, come find me.
Thank you, Lynn. All right. So Michael is asking, um, oh, right. Yeah. By the way, Lynn, I did want to touch on one more thing that you mentioned to Patrick also is I love your mentioning of, you got to keep your chin up, right? You got to keep a positive attitude. I try to encourage that in some of the other content that I put out because job searching is hard and it can beat you down, but you got to keep a positive attitude because that will come across in your interviews. If you're like
Absolutely.
beaten down, that will come across in your interviews, and then you're swimming upstream. But
Yeah.
thank you for mentioning that.
So I have an acronym that I would tell everybody to write down, and I'm gonna tell you what they are and
Okay.
what you need to do. So write down CT as in Tom, FAR. CTFAR. C is circumstance. C is empirical facts. You don't have a job, you want a job. That's a fact. They're not, but everything down from that is in your head. The first thing is thoughts. Are you having positive thoughts, negative thoughts?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I got a bunch of leads. I just need one job. I'm good, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Thoughts. Or, oh, I'm never going to find a job.
Right.
Oh, you read LinkedIn, it's so negative. Nobody's, the job
Right.
market is insane. Those are thoughts.
Yeah.
Those are not facts.
Yeah.
That's thoughts. The next thing that drives feelings. You can feel defeated, feel worthless, or you can be pumped up. I am
Mm.
one phone call away from getting my dream job.
There you
That's
go.
all it's, you know what I'm saying? It's feelings. What thoughts and feelings do is drive your actions or inaction.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're feeling positive, your tone, you're gonna, you know what? Lynn is right. I'm gonna do that search. I'm gonna send out some notes. I'm gonna try and make some little that. Or if you're feeling, oh, there's no point, I'm gonna go back in bed. I'm gonna watch
Right.
Netflix. I'm gonna, and those actions, by the way, is what's gonna drive your results.
Love it. Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
never get a thought or a feeling confused with facts.
Yeah.
And the other bit of advice, don't let nobody else's thoughts get into your thought line. Because you're going to
Lynn.
target some people that are so negative that you're going to be like, oh, dear Lord, that's 5 minutes of my life I'm never going to get back.
Yeah.
Don't let those thoughts get into your thought line.
Lynn, I want to build on that because you're
Good.
reminding me of something that we talked on my stream. I think just last week or within the last 2 weeks, where because of social media and particularly data science, you hear people saying, "Oh, the interviews are so hard. Oh, the field is oversaturated. Oh," but those are the people that bombed the interviews. So why do you want to be
Well,
taking advice from
and
them?
oh, by the way, just by listening to them, you can tell they have negative thoughts. So how are they
Exactly.
going? How are they
Exa-
approaching what they're doing?
Well, that's exactly what I said. Well, how do you know that person's not an idiot? How do you know they didn't prepare for the interview? How do you know that you can't prepare better than that person?
That's
So
why I
yeah,
say
I
never
hear
let
you on that.
somebody else's thoughts go into your
Exactly.
thought line.
Exactly. Yeah,
That's them. That's a
yeah,
them problem, not a
yeah,
you problem.
yeah, yeah. And like I said, I'm tying it back to the audience here because it happens so much in the data science, data engineering, all
It
those jobs.
happens everywhere.
Right. Right.
Happens everywhere.
Yeah. So what I tell them also too is sometimes these trending things start on Instagram or whatever about how the interviews are hard or what the interviews are asking, and then I always say, well, what research did you do to verify that? Did you verify that for yourself? Because if you didn't, then you're
It's just a thought. It's not a
right,
fact until you can verify it.
right, and then
What
and
I
then you're
always
driving
say is,
yourself crazy.
would that comment stand up in a court of law? Because if the answer is no, don't incorporate it.
Right,
Don't incorporate it. And
right,
this maybe sound really way off the reservation. I'm gonna tell you what, guys. You get what you put out. I have not drawn a
yeah,
paycheck for 2 months. Do I strike you as somebody who looks unhappy or no? I'm very encouraged because when the right job shows up, it's gonna be mine. I have no doubt. And in the meantime, I'm going to just keep helping other people, doing what I can to put positive energy in the universe because
right.
that's what's going to come back. That's all I can do. There's the pieces you control. You don't control what anybody else thinks. You don't control what anybody else does, but you 100% control your thoughts and feelings and what you do.
Love it. Great message, Lynn. Thank you so much for that. So let me keep on moving on here because there's a few more questions. Michael asks, what tools and technologies are you currently using for HR analytics as someone with a tech background? How do you decide which new tools to adopt, and how do they integrate with existing HR systems?
Oh, you just said the magic, painful word. I'll tell you who's had a really great run in terms of a technology solution, and I actually lived through it. It was one of the last things I did at City. We went on Workday. Now, Workday is a big HR system
Sure.
that, again, the devil's in the details because what Workday does allow and enables, if it's installed properly and you can get everybody behind it, is it allows for a lot of self service. And so, there's a lot of things that people having to call HR or do something that Workday allows a lot of process automation. But in terms of picking a solution, it really depends because there's other solutions. I mean, you hear Paycom, Paycor, there's a bunch of other HR solutions out there. I think a lot of what it relies on is what's the size and complexity of the organization you're trying to deal with. A very small organization, you think of some of these tech startups, they don't have the money to invest in a work day, nor do they need it. So it really depends, so that's sort of what ought to be driving any technology spend, and I don't care what space it is what do you need it to do? What are you must haves, nice to haves? I've done a bunch of these across a lot of different parts of a bank in terms of buying platforms. But you said the magic ugly word, and it's the one that I think gets, and it's quite frankly how I've earned my living over the last several years. It's the integration, because what a lot of organizations tend to do is they have a need that their current solution isn't fulfilling. They buy another solution, bolt it onto that one, and then they keep going. And that's all well and good, but over the course of time, you end up with a spaghetti bowl. And where that chicken, this is an old saying, where that chicken is coming to roost now is at a much higher level, is as now everybody's trying to get to the cloud. So there's cloud enabled, there's cloud, native. And while you'll hear people talk about those as interchangeable terms, they're very different. A cloud native solution means that its architecture is built in such a way that it can take advantage of all of those cloud microservices that become available. You'll hear companies talk about software as a service, cloud native software as a service, where you either pay, you're charged monthly rather than a license. You basically, the liability for keeping the program running sits with the vendor. You get charged based on number of active accounts or number of seats, number of current users, all of those things. The biggest trick in most organizations is sorting through the integration point. Now, I'm a big fan of API, if API is done properly, because it's easy. Um, but not everybody can do that, because I think we're in sort of that depending on the maturity, and you'd be surprised at how immature even some very large, well-established organizations are.
Sure.
Uh, there are some things where you may have to do an integration with one of your essential third parties that sends you an XML file, a flat file. So
Hmm.
you really, so integration becomes very, very tricky depending on how many tentacles out from that solution you've got to have a bi-directional feed with. So integration becomes a nightmare. It just does,
Absolutely.
because and I have gone into organizations and said, well, why do you still have this software? This software is there. One of the things I always look for is, are there opportunities to sunset software? Because what ends up happening is you'll buy a piece of software to augment something, but it also does some other things. And so then you start having redundancy, only nobody does anything to sunset the tech. And so you end up with this bowl of crap that, and it's a death by a thousand cuts, because all of this stuff, gets charged and charged back and whatever. And it's hard to keep track of all the costs. I remember one time, one of the things I got asked to do at Citi when I was in global ops and tech was, can somebody please tell me how much fraud prevention costs this organization? And Citi, mind you, has a system that actually tracks every software that's been bought, what version, what country, blah, blah, blah. So you start there, but then you go and figure out what else have they bought that maybe isn't in this system, because humans don't always enter things. I remember going to the head of tech and told him I stopped counting at $1 billion a year we were spending. And that's
Wow.
everything from um, fraud detection, AML, all of the, all of it. It's an outrageous sum of money if somebody takes the time to cost it out. And
Sure.
the bigger and older the organization, the more of it there is.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely appreciate your points on integration, because coming back to what you said earlier, that's not really something that you would understand making the shift from school to a company. The way I've illustrated that, bringing it back to data science, is that as a when you're in school, the data is just given to you and it's all nice and neat and ready to go.
Right. You don't have to
But
make sure it's clean. You don't have to make, yeah.
right, right. But when you get into the corporate world, it's you gotta pull it from a PDF that's emailed to somebody else's inbox, in another country, and you got to bring that data. It's all of
Oh,
those
and
pain points.
and let's not forget, some countries don't let their data leave the
Sure,
country. When
sure.
GDPR came into being, my Budapest team only could do the reporting for the German market because
Yeah,
that data couldn't sit in Florida
right.
because of GDPR. Can I give a real life story about the power of integration and data and the
Yeah,
difference
please.
between what you learn in a classroom? Because I remember one of the things you wanted me to talk about was a tough situation.
Yeah.
So let me give you a real life tough situation and the power and problems with data integration and all this good stuff. So as I said, my team was responsible for all the HR reporting. So when I was doing my roundtables, now I made it my business to do a weekly one-on-one with each of my directs, and then every other month touch base with even my first line data analysts at the sites. And I remember sitting in a roundtable with them in Florida, and I said, it seems like some of these reports take a while, especially some of the candidacy slate reports. What's going on there? Why? Because so City used Taleo as its recruiting software. So that's what back then. Now it's Workday because we did convert to Workday, but back then it was Taleo. And so you had the applicant, the self-disclosure. We had already decided anybody who didn't disclose just went into this other category. Um, and I said, why does it take so long to get these reports out? Well, because some business units send those follow-up emails to change some of the data because they said there's something wrong with Taleo. Now, mind you, I had not heard that there were any problems with Taleo. So I went back and I went to IT first. I said, guys, I'm hearing from my guys that there's problems with Taleo. Has anybody report? Is there anything in Jira? Is there anything in ServiceNow where anybody's reporting problems on Taleo? No. I said, all right. So I go back to my guys. Who's sending these notes? So there's a few different business units. Add this candidate, do this, do that. I'm like,
Hmm.
why? Problems with Taleo. Really? Why just check with IT? They say there's no problems with Taleo. Well, my recruiters in XYZ country don't like Taleo, so they don't always enter everything into Taleo. And I said, uh-huh. Well, and sometimes the candidate doesn't select this, and so then we do. I was like, okay, we're not doing this anymore. The bank has invested in a system. The data in the system, there's nothing wrong with it. If your recruiters need to be trained or have it be enforced they use the system, then you do that. But on this day, from now on, we're only going to report on what's in Taleo. And as the global reporting team, our report is the one that counts. You don't like the numbers, then you come to me and ask me if something is missing, and we'll look into layout. But if it's a training issue, deal with it. If it's a whatever, my favorite email in that whole nightmare, because this turned into a big bureaucratic thing, I had to say to my guys, I'm going to be the bad guy. So the next email you get, tell them that you were told that you no longer could massage data, copy me, and tell them if they had any questions to come to me directly. Because I did not want my guys to get the blowback. They were not getting paid enough for that noise and the bureaucracy at City. So the one that I threatened to go to our CEO with, because there is no shame in my game, I got an email that got forwarded to me with the sorry, but we're not doing that. Was one of the people in one of the groups wanted us to change the candidate slate reporting and change a candidate that was applying for a very senior role as from being white female or undisclosed to Latina because her first name was Maria. I
Wow.
stuff you can't make up, guys. I went back to my guys and I said, listen, I'm not going to be an ass here, but I am going to be an ass because senior leaders, part of their comp, part of their incentive is hitting those diversity candidate slate numbers. And what I said to my guys was if we're massaging reports like this, and we know that those numbers ultimately have an impact on incentive, that, in my view, is no different than stealing from the teller drawer. We are not in that business. And I will go to Mike Corbat, who was the CEO at the time, and I will ask him what he thinks of this if we get any more pushback. That was probably the toughest situation that I ever dealt with. But fortunately for me, when I went to the leaders and explained my rationale and showed them this email with the names blacked out other than the context of the email, they were 100% behind. But again, this one of my analysts came to me with this. Well, this is the email I got. So it's,
Wow.
yeah.
Very interesting example there, Lynn.
Yeah, I remember my reaction to the change it to Latina because her first name was Maria. I'm like, they never heard of Maria Schreiber. This is, I'm not sure how that's a, yeah,
uh, we are past an hour. Are you okay to continue, Lynn?
I am.
Okay. So Rahul asks, what are the metrics you consider in an HR analytics report? Now, that's probably a really broad question, right? Because I'm sure you've had a lot of reports and whatnot. But maybe could you just give us your favorite example of some of the metrics that are out there, or maybe metrics that people wouldn't expect that are being collected by HR? Maybe like an unexpected metric.
I think one of the ones that kind of made me giggle, which was somewhat ironic, was at one of the things that we used to track was the campus hires, what schools,
Hmm.
and City had a real focus on hiring from what they called the platinum schools. So these are the usual suspects. This is the Ivy League, whatever. Now, mind you, I should caveat this by saying I actually went to Yale. So this is not me poo-pooing the Ivy League. I'm a very happy, proud Yale alum. Um, but it just sort of struck me because I thought, really? I went to this school. These people are, at the end of the day, whatever. So I
Sure.
asked, again, I'm great at asking the 3-year-old question. We're so maniacally tracking campus recruiting. That's lovely. Has anybody gone back on the hires and taken a look at the performance rating distribution of those folks that came out of these platinum schools compared to everybody else? Guess what? Performance metrics were the actual performance review metrics were no different. There was no statistical difference on the whole, whether somebody came out of Harvard or came out of, I don't know, pick another school. And I always find that stuff fascinating. So it goes back to what I know I'm probably a broken record. There's there's an old saying that uh, statistics don't lie, but liars use statistics. I think I think there always is an opportunity to go one level further. There's always another question that maybe should be asked.
I love that. Speaks to the curiosity again. Thank you for that. Um, so Ahab's asking a great question here.
Oh God, hopefully I have a
Um,
great answer.
Coming up with a unique project subject that is also relevant for a role is a challenge. What are some things that stand out to you in the project section when scanning through hundreds of applications?
I'm big on the headline. I want to know, how do you see yourself? Because I think a resume
Hmm.
should always be your story. So if you don't feel good about it, keep messing with it until you do. So
Hmm.
like if you look at my LinkedIn profile, it says problem solver, aka getting stuff done expert. It's not the most professional set of words you're probably ever going to see, but it is who I am. And so I would tell you that, when you're thinking about what to put on the resume, and I get that it's hard, particularly if you don't have any real life experience. So here's what I would tell you. When you look at it, so I'm going to answer this with kind of advice. When you are applying for a job, here's how I want you to think about what your resume, what that piece of paper you're going to send in says to a recruiter.
Hmm.
Look at the job description. And what you should do is, there's two sections, and then sometimes they're blended. It says skills and qualifications. Every one of those qualifications, turn it into a question that something you did in the past answers. That's the so this is so if the job description says, oh, proficient with blah 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 blah. Okay, what have you done in your learning, or what actions are you doing right now that address that? Turn every skill or qualification into an interview question, and what does your resume say to answer that? That's how you get a hiring manager's attention.
All right, let me say that again because I think you're hitting an important point. Turn every skill and qualification
In the job
into
description.
into an interview answer. I think you said.
Yep.
Okay, interesting. Very interesting. That's a good tip, guys. I hope you guys are writing that one down. That sounds like a good tip.
I've been at this a while, Dennis.
Yeah, appreciate that. All right, so Michael, Michael, is that a repeat question? No, I think it's a different question. So Michael is asking, how do you ensure that HR analytics initiatives are aligned with the company's overall business strategy? Can you provide an example of a business decision that was significantly influenced by insights or influenced by HR analytics?
Like I said, the one I would go back to is the B of A example. When I was the co-chair for Diversity Council,
Okay.
we had looked, and it was like we started with the, okay, what's the spread between B1 and B9, which B of A did a really great job of flattening the org back then. And so we only had 9 pay bands. So it was, so B9 is your entry level, B1 was the CEO and his directs. And so we started with real simple, what's the distribution? And in those entry level jobs, like I said, we had no diversity issues. You could see, in, like I said, in some of the entry levels, call center, for example, some markets we had 65% diversity. It was great. Where it flipped was once you got to B4, which at B of A was department head. And then it just kind of, and when you got to the first 3 bands, B1, 2, 3, I mean, the numbers were so few, you could almost guess who the people were in the role because it was so few. So we started there. That was HR analytics, but basic, nothing major. But what we did was we shared those results and said, Bank of America prided itself on, where there was an ongoing high potential list, and we said, well, let's take a look at those. Let's see how well represented our minorities are. And, so we actually put in programs, to infuse the high potential development programs to make sure they represented the numbers we wanted to see at the actual leadership level. But then we actually took the extra step and did a corporate initiative to pump more diversity by identifying people and putting in a formal mentorship program. And we tracked the numbers. And inside of 2 years, we started to see a difference in the distribution. So we didn't just do it and say, okay, we're done. We actually tracked
Nice.
that the actions we took were having an improvement. Now, when you start talking about careers and diversity and, um, you know, jobs, promotions and stuff don't happen quickly. So you have to track it over a series. Um, but then the other thing we also were tracking was employee engagement. How were employees feeling? Because, I think when people feel invested in and valued, that they behave differently. So, I mean, there was lots of good that came out of that.
Okay, great. Great. Thank you for that. Some really great feedback in the chat here, Lynn. Patrick says, thank you so much for the advice and the positive attitude. Good luck to you on your own hunt.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, Ahab says, Miss Lynn dropping gems. Thanks a lot. Uh, Michael says, big gems. Leo says, absolutely great guest. So that's great. Let me go
That
down. This
means
is a real
that means Dennis will invite me back again. It'll all be good, guys.
That's exactly what it means. Ahab has a great question here. So Ahab asks, there is a lot of recruitment slash HR myths online. I would like to know maybe the biggest ones you saw, like recruiters who filter out resumes are non-tech people, systems do all the filtering automatically, so on and so on. So Lynn, could you share like what is your number one like top tip that people think about recruiters that may not be true or about the process? What do you think? What's a big myth out there?
I think, quite frankly, depends on again. This goes back to the I don't let other people's obnoxious thoughts enter my thought line. But I've heard it all. I mean, if you go on LinkedIn, based on some of the posts, which, oh, by the way, I don't care how crappy you personally feel about your recruiting process you may be living. Can I just give you some advice? Please don't post any of that crap. I don't care. I don't care if you're ready to kill a recruiter. Please don't post that on LinkedIn. That stuff lives forever.
Yeah,
And not for nothing, most recruiters are going to go look at your LinkedIn profile
yeah,
first,
for sure.
if you have one. So that's my first bit of advice. Don't put that crap out there. That does not do any favors. You want to have that conversation, go to the bar, go have that conversation with your friends. Uh, don't put that stuff in a network, in a platform that is designed for professional networking. That's number one.
Sure.
I've seen and heard all the myths. I don't know, quite frankly, how many of them are true or not true. Here's the one, my own personal thing that I won't ever do. You'll see on LinkedIn a lot of times it'll say, oh, jobs suggested for you, whatever, because you can fill them and you can click an apply button. I have never done that. If a job is available, I go right to that company site, because the one thing I have personally experienced is there was a job that I thought was perfect for me. I hit the apply, and then I never heard anything back. I didn't get the rejection email. I didn't get nothing.
Yeah,
Now, fortunately for me, I had a connection, a very senior connection at the organization, and I said, this really doesn't sound like something you guys would do. Turns out the job wasn't real.
yeah,
It was, and so I would say this, I don't care how imperfect the role seems, um, go to the company site, their career site. Do not apply through any of the job boards, because you
hmm
have no way of knowing how old they are, how real they are.
yeah, for sure.
So my bit of advice would go straight to the company site.
Yeah, yeah. To your point, Lynn, is I'm also finding that there's a lot more fraud this time around. I have run into so many fraudulent postings, and then or you send your resume, and then and they come like a WhatsApp message reaches you asking for information, and it's just like
I've
this
gotten
is
those
not right.
too, and I just immediately block those. All of a
Yeah,
sudden, you get a
yeah,
text message out of the
right,
blue
right,
from a Gmail account saying, "Oh, we have this job. You could start immediately, making $1,000 a
right,
day. Go to this WhatsApp." No, just delete, delete,
right.
delete.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Ahab says Miss Lynn is a G. um, this this is amazing. Thanks a lot. I actually wrote it down on paper. I think he's referring to the how you mentioned about take your skills and turn them into an interview answer. Um, Leo said, as a New Yorker, I'm in love with her New York attitude and facing obstacles in life. And Joseph says, love all the valuable advice. That's great feedback, Lynn.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
In case you
So, Lynn,
can't tell, this is like my favorite thing. I've always said, my personal story is I'm a Puerto Rican kid that grew up in the projects. My father came to this country in the 50s with a fourth grade education. So growing up, lots of rice and beans, lots of poor days, no toys. And my father always said, listen, because we're poor, because we're Puerto Rican, you're probably going to have to work twice as hard just to be seen equal.
Sure.
And then the next thing out of his mouth was, I'm not raising any victims.
Yeah.
If you ever want those things to change, you have to have a seat at the table. And when you get that seat at the table, don't you ever forget where you came from and help others. And I lost my dad over 40 years ago. And this is how I honored that message because, you guys, the challenges you're facing today, different than when I faced when I got out of college, but there's always going to be challenges. And what you need to do is build some relationships, have some people that you can trust and go to that are going to give it to you straight and give you some advice. And I hope you will see me as that resource. There's no shame in my game. The last young lady I mentored was a young lady growing up in the projects in the Bronx. She came here from Dominican Republic. I am happy to report she just graduated with her master's degree at the University of Albany. And I
That's
call her one of
awesome.
my extra children.
That's
So,
awesome.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Lynn. So remind us where we can find you again, Lynn. What's the best way to reach out to you?
LinkedIn. That's I am very active on LinkedIn, so that's the easiest way. And then once we connect, we can exchange phones and emails and whatever else, depending on what somebody needs.
Okay, guys. So that's Lynne Labrador. You can
Yeah,
find her
all
on
one
LinkedIn.
word.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You can find her on LinkedIn. So it seems like Lynn, you sound very open to people reaching out to you.
of
So if
course.
somebody in the chat wants to do
I
that,
love people. My daughter teases me that I would talk to a tree if I thought it would talk back. So
that's a good one. I haven't heard that one. That's a good one.
that's what my daughter said.
So Lynn, thank you so much for your time. You've been really generous with your time. Really appreciate that you're willing to do this live and come out and talk to us in real time. So really, again, just thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. Best
All
of
right.
luck, everybody. You're gonna do great.
All right. Thanks, everybody. So that wraps up our latest edition. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of your families, and I'll see you next time.